Thank you, Kira. Good morning, everyone. Morning. Happy Mother's Day to all the mums in the room, those watching online, to my mum, happy Mother's Day. Today we're starting a new series called How to Follow Jesus for Real. Now, we Christians, we use a lot of different language and a lot of different kinds of phrases to talk about what it means to become a Christian and what it means to be a Christian. We'll say things like, do you believe in Jesus? Or do you trust in Jesus? Or have you given your life to Jesus? Have you invited Jesus into your heart? Now, they're all good statements. I use them. They all find their basis in the New Testament, and they all point to something about what it means to become a Christian and what it means to be a Christian. But when I stop and think about those words and those phrases, I find that they're all pretty vague in what it looks like in my everyday life. So just think about those top two. Do you use that kind of language for other people? Do I say that I trust in Bridget? Well, not really. She says hopefully not. Would I say that I believe in Kira? Well, in some ways, in some aspects, sure, but it's not really the kind of language that I would use. Now it gets us somewhere with Jesus, but it's all kind of vague, and it doesn't necessarily change my everyday life. When I think about believing and trusting in Jesus, sometimes it feels just more like it's an insurance policy that I have for later. It's about heaven after I die, and that's what it's there for in my life. But I find that talking about following Jesus is much more practical. Following Jesus is about here and into the future, not just about something that has happened in the past. When I talk about following Jesus, it's active rather than passive. And I find that about following Jesus, it's about going somewhere rather than having been somewhere before. And so if I think about my own life, if I think about, around the time I finished high school, that young adult age, I could say yes to those statements that are on the screen. I could say, yes, I believe in Jesus. I believe that Jesus can get me to heaven. I trust in Jesus, that he can forgive me no matter what I have done. I have given my life to Jesus. Multiple times, in fact. I have invited him into my heart. But at that point in my life, was I following Jesus? Nope. Was I wanting to live my life in a way that honored him? Not really. Was I wanting to represent Jesus with the way that I spoke and the things that I did? Not particularly. Was I wanting to become more like Jesus? No. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I didn't really care what Jesus wanted me to do. And if he asked me to do something, I probably wouldn't do it unless it happened to coincide with what I also myself wanted to do. So I trusted in him, I believed in him, I'd given my life to him and accepted him into my heart. But in real life, I was doing what I wanted to do, living my own life with no reference to him. I wasn't following Jesus at all. I didn't have a belief problem. I had a following problem. I wonder if there's anyone here today that can identify with that. You go, well, yeah, I believe Jesus existed. I don't really have a belief problem, but am I following him? I don't know. We don't just do this with Jesus, we do this with other areas of our life as well. I bet you've saved a fitness video on social media and never looked at it again. I bet you have liked the heck out of some of those parenting posts, but then when your kids start to push the boundaries, the parenting posts go out the window. You've made budgeting plans until something shiny appears. See, agreeing is easy. Liking is easy. Making a plan is easy. But actually following for real, that costs something. And so let's look at what Jesus said about what it means and what it looks like to follow him. So this is Jesus in Luke chapter 9, verse 23. It says, "Then Jesus said to the crowd, 'If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily, and follow me.'" So in Jesus' time, with the people that were physically there with him, to be a follower didn't just mean that you would listen to your leader. If you were a disciple, which is like an apprentice, and Jesus was a rabbi, a teacher, a leader, and he had disciples, apprentices, followers. So if you were the follower, you didn't just listen and agree with what your rabbi and your teacher said, but you followed them everywhere. You tried to copy their life and do what they did and put their teaching into practice in your life. Now, we know this not just from the New Testament. In the Mishnah, which is a collection of Jewish teachings from around the time of Jesus, kind of spreads over a few hundred years, this collection of teachings. It says that there's this kind of blessing or this statement about being a follower. It says, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. So may you follow so closely behind your rabbi that the dust from his sandals kicks up and covers you, and you're covered in your rabbi's dust. But it also means may you sit so closely at your rabbi's feet that the dust from his sandals and the dust as his feet just move around on the ground, may that kind of, fall onto you because you're sitting so closely, wanting to become like your leader. Like Mary, one of Jesus' disciples did one day. Her sister, Martha, was busy working, but Mary sat so closely she would have been covered in the dust of Jesus' feet. That's what Jesus is inviting us into. Not just to remember more about what he's said, not just to know more about what he's saying, not just to agree with what he's saying, but to become like him. It's not about more information, but it's about transformation, becoming like him. Now, our last series, the one in the Psalms, Brian developed that series. He preached most of it, and it was fantastic. I loved going into that scene on the night before Jesus, or the night when Jesus was betrayed, and figuring out Jesus probably sang some of the Psalms that we have in our Bible, and looking at the Psalms and then the connection to that night. It was incredible, and it wasn't just information, it wasn't just interesting, it was transformative in our hearts and our minds. But Brian and Laura and I had been saying, hey, that's great, but now let's get more practical about our faith. What does it look like for real and in our everyday life? And so that's what this series is about, because most of us, especially if you've been a Christian a while, most of us love new information. We love to find out something new about the Bible or about Jesus. And if we've discovered something new, if I stand here and I tell you something you didn't know before, oh, you feel good when you go home. I've been to church. I feel like a real Christian. I learned something new. That's good, but to be honest, most of us don't need that. I love learning new things, but I don't really need any new things. What I need is to follow Jesus more. So remember when I was coming out of high school, I didn't have a belief problem. I had a following problem. And today, I don't have an information problem, but I still have a following problem. That I don't always follow Jesus closely or even want to or try to become like him or do what he asks me to do. Now, think about when you learnt to drive, or maybe you are learning to drive, or you're younger and you're anticipating when you learn to drive. You get in the car behind the steering wheel for the first time with your instructor. Do you agree with your instructor? And you think to yourself, yes, I understand the road rules. I agree with what they're about. Do you believe in your instructor? You go, well, they've got the qualifications. Maybe it's mum or dad. They've been driving for years. I'm still alive. Okay, I believe in my instructor. They know what they're doing. Do I trust my instructor? Yeah, I'll try a few things that they say. They seem to know what they're doing, so I will place my trust in what they say, and I'll do a few of those things. But will you follow your instructor? Will you actually do every single thing that your instructor tells you to do when you get behind the wheel of the car? If you agree, that's good. You don't get anywhere without that agreement level. If you trust, that's even better. You're going to go further. And if you then begin to follow, transformation can begin and you'll actually learn to become a good driver. But if you don't follow, you'll crash. And most of us crash spiritually at some point in our life. You might feel like spiritually you've been crushing for years. And it's probably because you haven't done any following of the one that you say you want to follow. Because Jesus didn't come just to upgrade your knowledge about God. He didn't come just to upgrade your information and beliefs about God. Jesus came to lead your life, and he dares you to follow him. Now, the following is sometimes a little bit easier at the beginning, same as driving a car. You know you don't know. You accept you don't know, and so you do place your belief and your trust in the instructor, and you do whatever they say because you know you don't know. But it gets a bit more difficult after a while, doesn't it? Because you start to get a bit of confidence, and you start to get a few runs on the board or hours in your logbook. And then when the instructor asks you to do something that you don't understand or you don't agree with, then what are you going to do? And it's the same as a follower of Jesus. At the very start, you're like, all right, Lord, everything. No matter what you say, I'll do anything. I'll go anywhere. I'll give everything up. You are just incredible. But then as you go along a bit, and some of those habits are a bit more entrenched, and some of your resistance is a little bit higher, what does it mean then to follow Jesus when you've been a Christian for a while? So let's read again, and we'll go a little bit further this time. In Luke chapter 9, Jesus said to the crowd, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. You must take up your cross daily and you follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it." You can't do both. If you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you'll actually save it. And what would you benefit if you gain the whole world but you yourself are lost or destroyed? Now you're sitting there in the driver's seat. You've got a few dozen hours in your logbook. You know what you're doing. And your instructor tells you to do something that you don't understand and you don't agree with and you think they're wrong. What do you do? Now, if you choose your own way, maybe you were right. All of our instructors are fallible, not infallible. They're not always right. It's possible you were right and everything comes out okay. But what's more likely as the learner driver is that you crash, or you get lost, or you get stuck, or you get booked by the police, or you fail your test. Following Jesus starts with saying every single day, even when I think I know better, I'm going to do what he says. Even if I think I know better, even if I think I'm right and I don't understand what he's saying and I don't get it, even when I think I'm right, I'm going to do what he says. Because most of the time, remember, we don't have a problem with believing. Most of the time, we don't have a problem with information. We have a problem with authority. Who actually gets the final say in the everyday moments of your life? Your way or Jesus' way? Your voice and what you want, or Jesus' voice and what he wants? And at one level, that's a big adjustment. At one level, that's a life-changing decision, and we'll talk about that at the end of the service. But also, it's more often just very, very simple, very, very small, everyday decisions. It's why that metaphor of taking up your cross daily is so helpful and important. It's the things that mostly no one else notices and no one applauds. It's the things that are not dramatic but are simple every single day. It's choosing to swallow your words rather than firing back in an argument is often the way of Jesus. It's telling the truth, even when it's going to cost you. That's following Jesus. It's choosing to speak up, even when you'd rather just stay silent and let things happen. And it's choosing generosity, even when you're not sure if it'll be enough or if you'll have enough. See, following Jesus is a lot less about a big, heroic moment that they could put into a movie, and it's more about 1,000 quiet moments. They're the signs of the transformation that you're becoming like the one that you're following. You're becoming like Jesus. Now, I know you don't need any more information, but I do want to tell you that I learned something this week, and it's cool. So at least, even if you change nothing about your life, you can go home today and go, I'm feeling like a good Christian today because Geoff taught me something. Unless you already know this. In the ancient world, they did not have photocopiers. They had Gestetner machines. And all the old people were laughing because they had Gestetner machines. They apparently used to turn a thing and then things would copy. I don't know. But before that even, before the Gestetner machine, scribes would have to copy out by hand. And so when we say we have ancient documents, ancient manuscripts of the Bible, we mean that someone or a group of people actually copied out by hand the Bible. And so we have this really ancient, the oldest manuscript we have of Luke's gospel is from around 200 years after Jesus lived. It had been copied and copied and copied, and we lost all the earlier ones. But the oldest one we have is around 200 years after Jesus lived. And the scribes sometimes had shorthand. They had little shortcuts, like you might say, BTW, by the way. Scribes also had shorthand for what they would write. And one of the oldest symbols we have of Christianity is a starogram that you'll see on the screen. It's superimposing two Greek letters. Now, I only learnt this week thanks to the power of social media and Dr. John Dixon, who's an historian and knows what he's talking about. The starogram is a scribe taking the two Greek letters for the word cross, or stauros. Let me check because I don't know what these things are. The tau, which is like our English T, and the rho, which is like our English P. They make up that word and they superimpose them over each other, like their little shorthand. But what does that look like to you? It looks like a man on a cross. That's pretty cool. So it's not just BTW. It actually is a symbol that has meaning that they would then copy out and use in other ways, maybe early Christian graffiti. Before the fish, which has this whole other meaning, they would use this starogram to symbolize the cross. Now, where we find this is in Luke, and that's that little fragment on the right-hand side, and then it zoomed in. You can see the starogram there. That is where Jesus says, take up your own cross daily and follow me. They've done the starogram there, right in that text where Jesus says it. It's a reminder that the weight and the cost is not just for Jesus. It's also for us. He did the big part. He died on his cross. But he says for every one of his followers, there's a cost and there's a weight to carrying our own cross every single day. It's not always easy. It's not always the fun choice in the short term, but it always leads to life. The best life here and now, and of course, it's not an insurance policy, it's a direction towards heaven in the next life. Now, one other time Jesus explained what it looked like and what it meant to follow him, and he did it with a story about two builders. And this may be a familiar story to you as you remember Jesus telling it. It is two men who built two homes, and they built the same kind of home, but after they built it, the rain started to fall and the flood started to rise and the wind started to blow, and it revealed not how well they'd built the house, it revealed what they'd built the house on. Now, we understand this in Far North Queensland. Before we get to the idea of our houses starting to creak and sway, the trees creak and sway, don't they? And in Far North Queensland, the most dangerous time for a tree or for you to be standing near a tree is after we've had torrential rain for days and then the wind starts. Why? Because that's when the foundations have been softened. That's when the roots have been exposed. And that's when the biggest trees in the region can fall over in the breeze because they're not on a strong foundation. And so Jesus said in Matthew 7:24, he said, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it's built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey They hear the same teaching, but they do nothing with it. They don't obey. They're foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. Because when the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. So Jesus is saying, your life will face pressure, no doubt about it. The question is, what have you built your life on? That's the question. And it's not just who you're listening to, but what you're doing as a result of listening to Jesus. And it's possible to build an incredible house. It's possible to gain the whole world, Jesus said. Have everything you've ever wanted, everything you'd ever hoped and dreamed, but still be lost when the storm comes. But if you follow Jesus, which means listening to his teaching and following and obeying, then you'll be building on a solid foundation. Following Jesus for real builds on that strong foundation. Now, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'll give you a few seconds after each one to start to think about your response, but I'm not looking for any answers out loud. This is just for you and your honesty with yourself, but also for you to ask God and invite his Spirit to be honest with you as well. Whereabouts in your life has your faith stayed at the level of trust, but never moved to following? Where has your faith stayed at the level of trust, but never moved to following? Maybe in another aspect of your life, where has your faith stayed in belief mode rather than moving into follower mode? Maybe in another aspect of your life, where has your faith been in the past? You gave your life to Jesus. You chose to believe in him. You accepted him into your heart, but you have not followed him anywhere, in anything, for ages. And maybe where has your faith been agreement? Yes, Jesus. I'll say yes, Jesus, especially when I learn something new. That was cool. But nothing ever changes in your life. You don't look any different on the inside or the outside. It's just agreement. Last question. What's one thing that Jesus has already asked you to do? You already know he's asked you to do that you haven't done yet. It might be big, but it's probably not. It's probably small to medium, but it's not new. It didn't come up with it just then in this moment. You already know. And it's not vague. You might not be able to tell me how you know Jesus has asked you to do it. You just know that he has. And you also know you haven't done it yet. Do that this week. That's what it would look like to follow Jesus. Do that today. Take up your cross today and follow him. You don't need to overhaul your entire life in a day. You can't anyway. All he's asking you to do, take up your cross today and follow him. Let me give you an example. This is quite big and quite profound, but it began just with a simple, everyday decision. Andrew Hamilton is a pastor and an author in Perth, and he wrote recently about something that Jesus asked him to do. I'm going to put the quote on the screen, and I'll read it to you as well. He writes that it's been 11 years since I gave up alcohol, but it happened because in a moment I heard him say, stop. I grappled with drinking in moderation, and I'd failed on numerous occasions. I just loved wine. And then one day, clear as a bell, Jesus said, stop. And for someone who holds to the idea of Jesus as Lord, the only appropriate response is to say, yes, I did. And he hasn't said that I can start drinking again yet, so the ban is still in force. Now, I love that because that's Andrew's ban. That's not everybody's ban. That's Jesus saying to Andrew, hey, for you, taking up your cross today means in this area you need to stop. And he did. And every day since, for 11 years, he has. Over the next few weeks, we're going to talk more about what it means to not just believe in Jesus, but to follow him for real. Next week, we're going to talk about how do we even know when God is asking us to do something? How can we know his voice, and how can we follow his voice? We're going to talk about in future weeks what it looks like to follow him in public when other people are watching on. We're going to talk about how to stay close to Jesus so that we can be covered in his dust. And we're going to talk about doubt. What about when we do have doubts? Big picture or little picture doubts. But in a series of ordinary, everyday decisions, it begins, just like for Andrew Hamilton, it begins with that initial yes to Jesus. And for many people in the room, that initial yes has been demonstrated by baptism. A photo of Michael's baptism on the screen. Michael was supposed to be up here this morning. I was supposed to not do half of this message because I was just going to ask him questions about how did he come to know and follow Jesus and what's happened in his life as a result. And I'm not going to tell you that story because I hope that in sometime in future weeks we'll get him here, but he was really unwell overnight. And so he wasn't able to be here to tell his story. But his baptism is a symbol of his big yes to following Jesus. And his life since then has been evidence of that big yes in a series of everyday decisions. If you haven't been baptized, we want to give you the best opportunity on the 7th of June. We're going to fill up that water tank outside, and in 4 weeks' time, as part of this series on the 7th of June, we're going to offer baptism to anyone who's ready to say yes to Jesus. Now, it could be a later catching up. The outward symbol of baptism might be catching up with what's already happened in your heart. That's all good. I've baptized people that have been following Jesus for 70 years. But also, it might be a decision that you make for the first time today or you make on the 7th of June, and we would love to baptize you even then because it's an outward symbol of something that has happened in your heart. It's your yes to following Jesus. So we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks, but I just want to plant that seed and put that date in your mind on June the 7th. This year, our focus as a church, the thing that we're going to keep coming back to is magnifying Jesus. That's bringing Jesus into clear focus in our lives and in our church. Now, you can agree with Jesus your whole life and never be changed. Or you can choose to follow him and that will change everything about your life. The choice is up to you. We're going to sing our last song in a couple of minutes, but I want to give a little bit of space. My prayer this morning, and as our team prayed before the service, I shared with them to also be praying, is that God would speak to you this morning, that you would know something that you can do today, this week, to practically follow him for real. Because I can't tell you what that is. I don't know what that thing is in your life, that thing that you should start, that thing that you should stop, that person that you need to call, the thing that you need to do. I don't know what it is for you. But if there's one person who knows, it's God. And he is here, present by his Holy Spirit, filling this space, resting on you and filling your life. And I believe that he wants to speak to you today about what taking up your cross today can look like, what that one thing could be. And so I want to ask him to speak, and then I'm just going to give some time and some space for you to sit and listen and pray. And then I'll close this time in prayer, and then we'll sing together. So just get comfortable in your seat. You can close your eyes or keep them open, whatever you like. And Jesus, I want to invite you to speak to us this morning, to speak to me this morning. What does it look like for me to take up my cross today and follow you? just before I pray for us, let me say I wonder if Mother's Day is something that God is using in someone's heart today to bring those two things together. Because Mother's Day reveals broken relationships. And it may be with your mum or with a child, but it also just reveals other broken relationships in our life. And I just feel like maybe God prompted me to bring that up as a way of confirming that horrible, dreadful conviction you have in your heart in that moment of silence, that it's about reaching out to try reconciliation with someone today, is what it looks like for you to take up your cross. And if me saying that just increases your conviction, I think you're probably right. I think you probably are hearing from God. And I want to pray for you today as you do that. So let me pray and then we'll sing. Jesus, with that idea of being the one to reach out and try and reconcile today, to forgive today, to reconnect today, Lord, if there's anyone that you've put that on their heart, Lord, as horrible, as convicting as that feels, Lord, fill them with hope about what could be possible as they reach out. May that not just be a feeling of dread, may it be a feeling of hope and goodness of what you can do in beginning to restore a relationship. And Lord, for every person that's got a thing that they know that they need to do today and take up their cross, for every person where it feels impossible, I pray that you'd give them courage to just do it today. And that you give them hope about what's possible as they follow you for real. In your name I pray.